Well, hi listeners, and welcome to the Nerds of Business podcast. My name is Darren Moffatt. I'm a director at WebBuzz, the growth marketing agency, and I'm your host. It's great to have you with us for another one of our special UNCUT episodes. Today's UNCUT session is an interview I conducted as part of our recent series on the mindset of the disruptive entrepreneur. My guest today is Suzette Bailey. Suzette is the founder of SimpleMarketing.ai. This is a new platform that uses artificial intelligence to make content creation faster and easier for small business. So that's probably got your attention. She's got a really interesting story to tell. She's already had a successful consulting business for many, many years, but recently took an unexpected detour into the world of tech startups and hasn't looked back since. In fact, her journey as an entrepreneur encapsulates many of the qualities we covered in season 3, such as resilience, work ethic, and creativity. She describes herself as a recovering perfectionist, which I can totally relate to, and she shares some really powerful practical tips for business owners. So if you're an entrepreneur or a business leader, you won't want to miss this. In the meantime, I hope you enjoy this special episode of Nerds of Business Uncut.
I love data. I love kind of thinking with data.
You need to have systems, you need to have structure.
You're going to get chopped to pieces.
Enthusiasm is unstoppable.
We kind of hit a point where we were like, we need another leader.
Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and richer than you.
This is Nerds of Business.
So we're a very new company, actually. It's June 2021 at the moment, but we actually only launched in March of this year. So very new. And the company itself has only existed since January. So what we actually do is we help entrepreneurs and business owners to write the marketing content and other kinds of content that they struggle with each and every day using artificial intelligence. So it's about putting in a few keywords, key phrases, and it provides you content unique and original, so it's not templated or any of those sort of things, or curated content, and it gives you unique content on the particular topic that you're interested in. And now you can then actually, it's about getting to your first draft. So it's not about replacing people, it's more of a productivity tool than an automation tool.
How did you end up becoming the founder of a content AI company?
Well, it's an interesting journey, and it started with actually being a quarantine officer for the Australian Quarantine Service. And at the time, I was playing around with internet because I liked technology and internet at that time. And I had a boss. My boss comes up, would sort of say, "Oh, you can go on these sort of." Go and look after us, on the internet side of it and take care of us. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And from there, I actually developed a web development company with a few other people, and they fell by the wayside over the years. And what happened was I was sort of left being the person of this one company that had started as a web development company over 21 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And what it morphed into was an IT consulting company working to the Australian federal government and a lot of other big, large organisations, doing around sort of services around information management, document, content. So I've always been in the sort of the contents sort of realm for a long time, and doing systems and making things, really complex systems simple. Well, the thing is, a few years ago, I got a little bit sort of, tired of working with government and the larger organisations, and I really felt a passion to working with small businesses and entrepreneurs. And so I tried a number of times to actually spin off a sort of a startup from the company. In fact, a few of the ones were a company or a business, called FrogSense. Another one was Autopilot Business Systems. And I kept trying, and one of the things I kept failing quite spectacularly at was at actually marketing these businesses. Because I was a trained scientist doing reporting and documentation work and that sort of thing with the Australian government, I never learned to write out of third person. So when I actually tried to, a few years ago, take, sort of what I had learned in this huge amount of expertise and be able to help small businesses, I actually bombed spectacularly. I used to get really, really upset and frustrated by the fact that I could not sell a $500 course online, yet I could go and do a six-figure deal, walk in and do a six-figure deal really easily on the Sensory 7 side. And I actually felt like a failure at times, because it's like, it can't be this hard. Everyone's doing it. They keep saying you can make money online. And from there, what happened was I, fast track a few years. Once the AI, was sort of me being a nerd and a geek, kept across a lot of technologies and changes and things. And when I saw AI technology had gotten to a point where it could actually write indistinguishably from humans, at least to that first draft level, I knew that there was an opportunity to take all of that experience that I had, as being a small business owner and a entrepreneur, and that what I thought at the time was a failure, but it was actually really me learning the problem. And that's actually how Simple Marketing came about, is because it came out of that real deep frustration that I had of not being able to write marketing content myself.
In some ways, it conforms to the classic cycle, doesn't it? Because, often entrepreneurs stumble across a problem themselves, they struggle with it, and they have that insight. It's like, oh, well, if this is so difficult for me, I wonder what it's like for other people. Is this a widespread problem? And to that point, what process of validation did you do? Like, how did you, once you kind of, discovered the problem and you thought you had something there, how did you validate the hypothesis that the solution would be a viable business?
Well, I did it twofold. I did the traditional market validation that you're supposed to do, which is go and talk to people and really. But I'd also been keeping a lot of in tabs with a lot of that community where I had been trying to, move into the small business market for a long time. So I actually would listen, not just sort of overtly going out, but actually listening to a lot of their conversations through Facebook, through LinkedIn, through their comments, through people's frustrations. But I wasn't the only one. That there was a lot of people who had this problem. One of the other things sort of earlier this year, some of you may or may not be aware of a new social media sort of phenomenon called Clubhouse, which is an audio-based sort of app for social media. And for me, I loved it because it was the first time for social media that it relied on me actually talking to people and solving problems as opposed to having to write content. Yep. I'd hated it so much I actually entirely, created an entire platform to avoid it. Great platform for if you're wanting to test messages and that sort of thing and ask in doing that market validation really, really quickly. So I went into lots of rooms and I asked people. So it's the same as going out and talking to teams. But on the flip side, even knowing that was actually the challenges occurred and everything. Honestly, we didn't probably do as much on validating that people would pay for the service. So we knew that there was people who and we targeted the wrong groups initially. And it's through pivoting that and listening and getting that feedback from the people that over time, when I say time, it'll just be like the last few weeks or last few months, we've pivoted to a point now that we're actually, ironically enough, coming back to a lot of the same customer base that I used to have with Sensory 7. So some of bigger organizations and some of the transformational the industry where people help online and that sort of thing. So I think you can never stop validating your market, really.
Well, that's right. I mean, when you take a new product to market, it's inevitably a series of assumptions, and you can... Hopefully you've got some data to back up those assumptions, but if everything was a sure bet, it'd take a lot of the fun out of life, wouldn't it?
Although we were not replacing copywriters, we were absolutely changing how people would work with a copywriter. So we're actually absolutely working with copywriters, and they see it, the ones who are getting on board with the technology and embracing it are seeing it as a way of getting rid of the grunt work that they didn't really like anyway, so that they could spend more time in finessing content. And that absolutely is still valid. That is entirely true that we are doing that. But where we're actually, some of the pivots that I mentioned that came about of us listening to our market and moving into that bigger market. Now, the bigger area, when I say bigger market, I'm talking about bigger businesses, businesses that are that really having a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't really work. They need it to be aligned to their business. And one of our very big pivots that's come out of all of the listening to people is that we're now tailoring our solutions to our clients. So essentially mass customization. So still making it very scalable from us as a SaaS provider, but from the business perspective, they get a solution that's tailored to them. In the area of, say, business analysis, where business analysts would traditionally go in and they write huge amounts of user documentation, other kinds of proposals, all these sort of things. So there's a lot of content that's generated in a project, but they're not actually necessarily billable. If you're a consultant organization or base, you'll know what I'm talking about. Or they're not necessarily, it's important, but not necessarily urgent in most cases. And a lot of clients won't pay for it. So by disrupting that whole way that business analysts and technical writers work and fast tracking them and making them more productive, it's an area of projects or IT projects in particular that's really never been touched. There's not a lot of help associated with that particular industry. There is for project managers, there are for other, for the developers and that sort of thing, but not so much the business analysts and tech writers.
These days, a lot of the content and the social content that you're referring to is produced offshore, by groups in India or the Philippines. And often the quality of the work is really quite good. It's produced offshore because there's a substantial arbitrage with the cost. It's a lot cheaper. So it seemed to me that would be another logical market that you're essentially disrupting there.
Yeah, absolutely. Disrupting and changing. So a lot of the really good quality ones, as you mentioned, you can get absolutely fantastic quality out of those people. Unfortunately, you can also get not so great content because a lot of them, English is not necessarily their first language or whatever language that they're actually writing in if it's not their first language. So the ones who are good, and this is games with copywriters, be they outsourced in another country or if they're in your own actual country, they are the good quality ones are going to find that they are going to change what they do and they're going to be providing higher value services. Unfortunately, the $3, $5 an hour type people are going to find that these types of jobs are not going to be available for them anymore because already we're seeing businesses using these kinds of services to fast track that and then using outsourced labor to edit the content as opposed to creating it and editing it.
Yeah. So that leads me to the next question. What do these entities that you're disrupting, what do they have to lose and what do you and by extension your customers have to gain from this technology?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a big believer of trying to look for the glass half full, not the glass half empty. But I absolutely know. Disruption in itself is a form of change, and change can be viewed very positively or negatively. The ones who embrace change, and the reality is, as much as people would like to stick their head in the sand, disruption from AI technology, not just our kind of AI technology, but AI technology in general, is already disrupting how jobs are created, how jobs are, and what kind of employment opportunities and sort of things are around. And I think the ones who embrace it are going to change and adapt, and there will be higher value particular tasks. I was even talking to someone yesterday who was talking about how eventually we're going to get to a point where we have people people's roles are going to be to manage AI processes doing different functions as opposed to staff who previously. And so there's still a role for us humans. And in fact, I think the magic occurs when AI and humans work together. We get AI to do the grunt work and humans do the finessing and the thinking outside the box and other things around that. And so the ones who can embrace that and actually adapt will thrive in this area. The ones who can't and are unfortunately, then I think they're going to find it more difficult moving forward. Even an example of another AI application recently. You think about things like fruit pickers. Well, fruit pickers, there's always going to be, they'll be able to do fruit picking. Well, there's a company that's actually created a machine that uses AI to actually assess the quality of the fruit ready for picking, and then it has an arm that goes and picks the fruit. So the person in that particular case is actually helping to moving or working with the machine and is monitoring the machine and monitoring the outputs and those sort of things. It's not actually, the person's not actually picking the fruit anymore.
And I mean, I agree with you that the AI will create some jobs, but it'll destroy vastly more jobs than it will create. And in fact, I'm keen to see whether or not you're familiar with a book called Rise of the Robots. Have you read that book?
No, I'm not aware of that one. I'll have to go and have a look at it.
So Rise of
the
Rise of the Robots. I think it's by an author called Martin North, and it was published about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, and I read it shortly after it came out. And frankly, it's a bit terrifying. And when you, if you go out and you talk to sort of average people out in the suburbs and you talk about AI, there is a lot of fear about it. I mean, it's not something that people understand. And anything that someone doesn't understand, they will often be scared of. But one of the main arguments of the book is that, yes, it will create jobs, but it will destroy many more than it creates. And that, obviously, a societal issue. It's a much bigger topic than our remit here today, Suzette. Yes, you obviously, your business is disruptive. It will have an impact, but, positive, but over time, businesses like yours will obviously mean that some people in current roles, there won't be work for them. What are the key disruptive forces of your offer, whether it be your tech, your business model, your distribution, or what have you? What do you think are the key forces that are really driving this disruption?
The first one is the fact that where you may have needed actually human, and you may have paid, as you were saying before, alluding to with the overseas outsourcing, that sort of thing, a job that may have taken 2-3 hours to do a single piece of content now takes probably 30 minutes, a minute or so to write it with the AI. And then even, if you spend another 29 minutes to actually edit it, there's a significant productivity saving on time. And the reality is that that's going to equate to less people being employed for the same roles. Although there are going to, I was talking to a business the other day that actually has 3 people employed writing content. Well, if you've got them now, one of two things is going to happen with them using the AI. They're either going to cut staff and have one person only on now to be able to edit the content that comes out and manage that process, or they're going to be able to redistribute those staff members to other tasks. And I do absolutely take your point that it gets to a point where there are no other tasks that aren't being done, or that they've optimized the productivity of that particular organization to the point where they can't do it any further. And that's where things like, societal changes will need to come in. It's interesting that you mentioned about, sort of that in that context of that book. For me, AI technology in general and ours also will be contributing to this. We're essentially the next industrial revolution. The introduction of machines had a huge impact on the workforce, and the AI is the technological equivalent of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we are in the 4th industrial revolution, so to speak. And I think, it's a very exciting time, but clearly, yes, rapid change does make some people anxious. What personality traits do you find yourself drawing on most in your journey so far, especially as it relates to SimpleMarketing.ai?
Well, probably the first one is perseverance. And please don't put me on to ask me who the quote was from, because I can't remember, but there's essentially a concept around that it's better to persevere than it is to actually and be persistent than it is to be smart. So essentially and I know I sort of stuffed up the quote specifically, but in essence what it's saying is you could have somebody, 2 people who are really, really, one person who's really smart and everything comes easy to, but doesn't have particularly a lot of persistence or a lot of resilience, and the other person who may not be as smart as that first person, but is prepared to keep going even in the face of adversity, that person is always going to beat the first person. Obviously, if you've got the intelligence and that sort of thing, that helps, but it's not everything. And in fact, perseverance, resilience, the ability to keep going in the face of adversity is absolutely critical as both a business owner in general, but particularly if you're an entrepreneur, and especially if you're an entrepreneur doing in a disruptive area. Because you're up against people, as you say, and I quite regularly hear, AI is scary. And, comments like that. And that can actually be quite demoralizing after a while, that you're having to essentially educate people in the advantages of this. And the other qualities for me is collaboration. I built my first business through actually, when I said that those 3 other founders left the business and I was left on my own, I didn't actually know at the time that business owners didn't do this. They didn't go around asking their competitors for help. And I did. I kept knocking on doors and going, can you help me? And that actually built a very collaborative mindset over the years, so that I now don't even know how to do business without actually being partnerships and helping and connecting people, because it always comes back to you and 10, 100-fold. So perseverance, collaboration, knowing when to ask for help, knowing also that you're not alone. You are not the only person who's gone through this, and, it can feel that way. And absolutely, there are times when you just want to pull the doona back over the blankets over the head and just go, no more, I've had enough. But you got to get yourself back up. You got to keep doing it. One of the things that I suppose the difference between now and when I was doing, starting the business a few, sort of 20 years ago, my other business, is I'm now a lot more forgiving of myself too. And I think people need to provide an ability to be forgiving of both themselves and the people around them, because we wear a lot of hats. Things are not always going to go to plan. Yep. It's stressful, and you are in a situation where you need to be able to just take a time out and go, you know what? I'm going to go and have that massage, or I'm going to have the afternoon off, and don't feel guilty about it. Yeah, absolutely. I joke about the fact that I'm an A personality with a recovering perfectionist. It's probably not that much of a joke. And so the drive and the passion and the competitive nature is definitely there. There's no question about that. Sometimes I'm actually competitive with myself, probably more so than I should be. Yep. But the drive for me is twofold. Now it's absolutely all of that. But the other thing, and the reason for me and the big change was I wasn't feeling that I was getting purpose out of what I was doing. It was absolutely a fantastic cash business, and it was it was a multi-million-dollar business. It was doing very well, and it would have taken gone through to retirement, and it would have it's been fantastic. But I had done everything that I could, and I wasn't really feeling that I was actually providing, or doing what I needed to do. So my purpose was to be able to help other people. And so for me, that I think was a big driver, is moving into Simple Marketing and Frog Sense and all the other ones in the prior, was trying to take that and be able to help business owners, because when all said and done, if you help business owners, you help businesses to grow, and growing, that means that helps the economy and it helps everybody. It ultimately, even with disruption, it's still ultimately the underpinning thing of our economy. A big aspect for me is the purpose part of it. The other thing of it too is I just like a challenge, and I do like solving new problems. And I used to joke that I could do my job in my sleep, and I actually got very, very sick a few years ago. And I literally did it in my sleep pretty much. I wasn't able to work more than about 10% a day, yet I was still over delivering on the work. And I sort of went, you know what? This means that I really am being able to do this in my sleep. I need a new challenge. Once I was obviously better. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, yes, there it is, people. That's where the drive comes from. And I think that's a really fascinating question. Everyone's different, of course. Everyone's got different drivers, I remember when I was starting my first business and setting up, I used to go and jump on a squash court and play squash against myself and pretend that my main to-be competitor was the squash ball. So, it takes all types. But I guess here's another question for you. It's the sort of classic nature versus nurture question. I don't think that everyone can be a disruptive entrepreneur. I think it's a pretty small cohort. What do you think? Do you think disruptors are born that way, or can they evolve, and which applies to you? Look, I agree with you. I think not everyone can be it, and not everyone needs to be or should be. There are still, even with disruption, there is always, some kind of jobs and things or other things for people to do. And we're all kind of different, and that side of it. At the same time, I think there's some skills that people can learn, but that's not the same thing. I used to sort of use this analogy that when I was working in the public service, I could do the job. I absolutely could, but I was a square peg in a round hole. And vice versa, I see some people who are public servants who come out and try to do business, particularly because for the people on the call, I'm actually in Canberra, which is the Washington, D.C. of Australia. So even not working in that industry, I still see a lot of people who are in that as a public servant. And there'd be a lot of public servants who'd come out and try to do business. And they really, really needed to be in a role, like an employee role, not an employer or business owner role, because I didn't have those innate skills. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely, both were valid situations. It's about recognizing who you are and being true to you.
What challenges do you foresee in the sort of, maybe medium term journey ahead for Simple Marketing? And how do you think you'll overcome them?
Well, probably the biggest one we have at the moment is us going up against our competitors in the US who are very well funded, and us being an Australian IT startup. It's not as well funded. In fact, we're investment for Australian-based IT startups is much harder to come by in smaller amounts. So we're sort of like feeling a bit like the David and Goliath type situation at the moment. So that's one big thing. But on the flip side, Aussies are very good at adapting and pushing sort of above our weight. Moving forward, some of the challenges for the business will be actually managing it as it evolves and it grows. So what kind of skills you need when you first start, when you start a IT startup or a SaaS business is very different to what you need to continue and growing a bigger one. So it's being able to recognize when is it worth, sort of bringing somebody else in to potentially be a general manager and all those sort of growth sort of aspects. But yeah, look, I think that's the biggest one at the moment is just getting that transition from being a bootstrapped IT startup into something that's investor ready and, moving forward.
That's nerdy.
So that's nerdy, Suzette. You've just used some jargon there. I know what it is, but I think we just need to unpack that briefly. You say bootstrapped. Do you just want to explain to people what bootstrap means?
Apologies. I usually stop myself. Thank you for giving me the call. Bootstrapping means as a business, we have self-funded ourselves. So we are, instead of actually taking investment outside of the company, we have, it has been sweat equity, which means the founders actually putting in their time and effort and expertise and not at the time being paid for it. Hence the word sweat equity, as opposed to most people being paid, and also putting in actual money from the founders and that sort of thing. So when you take investors, though, that's when you are actually you're an invested business. You've got investment in it.
Yep. No, that's a great explanation. Who's your most inspiring disruptor and why?
Well, that's changed over the years for me. And one that comes to when you said it comes to mind for me originally and was Alex Mandossian, who may or may not be very well known on this particular podcast, but he actually led a lot of the internet marketing, and anyone who goes and Googles Alex Mandossian will see that he's been around for like 20 plus years in the internet marketing space. But I actually had the pleasure of actually getting to meet him in Australia when he was presenting at one time here. And he was somebody that when I first heard him, this is an interesting story, I actually was at the 3-day conference with him. And over the course of the 3-day conference, I developed a very massive infection in my what actually found out was actually under my tooth and had to have surgery associated with it later. And I actually was an incredible amount of pain. And on the 3rd day, I knew I wanted to actually work with him. And I knew he was going to do an offer to work with him and that sort of thing at that point. And yet I was at the front of the room and he was at the back. And he had made such a profound impact on me with what he had been, what he was talking about and how he presented himself, I actually met, I think I was the second person to the back of the room to sign up with him, even though I was basically almost delirious with pain, because I was so keen to actually work with him. And I think the reason for that was because, some of you will go online, if you go and look at him, he can be quite gregarious in the US market, but in the Australian market, he adapted for the Australian market and was very much more, us Aussies, we don't particularly like sort of the really rah-rah type conference people.
Yep.
And he spoke to me on a number of different levels around business ownership, around internet marketing, and a whole range of other things. And I think he was the first person who gave me the permission to be me in that sphere. And I had never really, and I think a lot of us don't take the note to actually, when we're looking for mentors, we're looking for mentors and people that we want to aspire to, but we don't necessarily take into account the ones who are actually similar or on a pathway similar to ourselves already.
Wow. Well, I'm not familiar with that name. It vaguely rings a bell. Alex Mendozian. I'm definitely going to go out there and Google it, and I would encourage all of our listeners to do the same. But that's a fabulous story. Thanks for sharing that with us, Suzette. And I like what you said right at the end there, that he gave you permission to be yourself, or be the best version of yourself. And I think, that's ultimately, that's a gift, isn't it? That there's some generosity of spirit behind that. We now turn to a very famous recurring segment here at Nerd to Business, Suzette, called
Nerd Under Pressure.
Nerd Under Pressure. And today is Suzette from SimpleMarketing.ai. You are our AI nerd. We're going to frame you as the AI nerd today, and I think you might even be the very first AI nerd we've had on the show. So it's super nerdy here at Nerd to Business, and Suzette, we're after one killer hack or tip you can give to business owners for launching a disruptive tech startup. I'm going to give you 5 seconds thinking time. Okay, over to you.
Look, I think I touched on it before, and that's probably the biggest one even now is collaboration. I think it's, as you mentioned, it's a very understated skill and tip that people do, but it's a very powerful one because it's the basis of what all partnerships, including business relationships. It's like somebody described investors, for instance, as a marriage that you can't divorce from. Well, your strategic partners and the growth of your business is built on the strength of the relationships. And so the more you can be collaborative and the more you can work with others, the better that you are going to be able to get ahead. Nice.
I love that. I'm big on collaboration too. I think it's very, very underrated. And, it goes back to that sort of classic tenet, the sum is, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, I mean, you're bigger, you're more effective if you're collaborating with other people.
Nerd Superpower.
Okay, so this is Nerd Superpower, and we already know, Suzette, that you're a great collaborator. And we know a fair bit about you already. We've learned quite a bit over the last 40 minutes or so. But now what we need to know is your Nerd Superpower. So that's where we want you to nominate one skill or attribute or personality trait above all others that gives you the edge in everything you do in business.
Well, it was actually quite a few years ago, and it was working with Century 7 that I actually myself recognized this superpower as a superpower, because before that, I just assumed everybody did this. And I had been brought into a project that had been failing. I had had 2 project managers prior to me and was working. Basically, I was a last-ditch effort to get this project over the line. And I walked into this, and it was implementing a content management system into a very large organization. And when I walked in, she said, I think within a few days, they went, so, how does this particular software work? And I'm like, I've never touched this software before, because the actual software I'd never sort of thing. And they went, but, I'm sort of thinking to myself, but I'd give them options, and I would give them, this is what's going to happen. If you actually do this, you will actually have this result. And if I could see the different pathways of what was likely to happen based on their idea or, what actions they took. And I would say, look, if you do this, this is going to happen. If you do this, this is going to happen. And they're like, how can you see that? How can you say, like, see those? I'm like, and I'm stood there and I'm like, but how can you not? I mean, you've been using the software for a while now, and this is all this sort of thing. And it occurred to me that most people's brains didn't work like mine. Long story short, my superpower is actually to be able to see patterns in how people use information and be able to adapt that and to a scenario so that I can actually see what the implications and ramifications of actions is going to be.
Oh, well, that might just be the best nerd superpower we've had yet. Pattern recognition. I love it. That's pretty nerdy. And I'll tell you what, Suzette, because that's pretty nerdy, I'm actually going to pull out a rarely used segment here at Nerds of Business, and I'm going to put you through what we call
the Nerdometer.
So this is the Nerdometer, right? Now we save this stuff. This is a very special segment, this one. We only bring it out to people that we think are really quite nerdy. And so the Nerdometer, Suzette Bailey, is it's a very simple contraption. It's where we ask you to rate yourself out of 10 for nerdiness. So if you had to rate yourself out of 10 as a nerd, what's it going to be?
Look, honestly, I'd have to say is a 10 because I'm also a geek as well.
Oh, you heard it here first, people. She's broken the Nerdometer. We've got another broken Nerdometer. It's a 10 out of 10 rating here for Suzette Bailey at SimpleMarketing.ai. We love the nerdy stuff, Suzette. Thank you so much for that. All of my discussions with, close to 25 top entrepreneurs now, that most of them are really quite deep thinkers and they've often got a very restless mind. Now, whatever it is, it could be walking the dog, it could be meditating, the occasional nice glass of red wine, whatever it is. Do you have a mental habit or process that you've used consistently over the years to channel your creativity?
Well, the first one is actually talking to other people. Funny that about the collaboration side.
Okay.
I find my mind, when people give me problems or talk about things, it comes up with things. It's almost like it sort of rifles through the mental index cards and say, oh, you could use this piece of information. That's when I'm working with people. And I do find that I'm really much higher value output-wise and outcome-based when I'm actually working with people. The other side of it is when I'm going for a walk, or even things like showering and just having that downtime. And I think a lot of people don't give yourselves enough just me time. I was saying before around going for a massage and those sort of things and not feeling guilty about it, because it is actually quality time if you allow your brain to filter through things. And I'm a big believer that I do a lot of things on my gut reaction. And the first thing you think about gut reaction is like, oh, well, that's not, it's not based on fact. Well, the reality is, it's actually your subconscious going through and assessing all the different, sort of things that you've gone through, and you're using your experience and your knowledge base to come up with what's the answer. And, trusting your gut and trusting your subconscious to make the right decision and backing that can be very powerful too.